The air inside the Vanderhaven estate felt different from the air outside. It was cooler, for one thing, and it smelled faintly of expensive perfume and fresh flowers. Lily shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to find a comfortable spot on the marble floor. Her shoes were not made for standing this long. They were simple black flats she had bought at a discount store 2 years ago, and the soles were so thin that she could feel the cold hardness of the stone seeping up into her feet. She held a heavy silver tray in front of her, balanced carefully with both hands. On the tray sat 12 crystal glasses filled with a sparkling, golden liquid. It looked like champagne, but Lily knew it was just expensive sparkling apple cider. The guests here were drinking enough real alcohol without the catering staff adding to it. Lily took a deep breath and tried to make herself invisible. That was the first rule of serving: be seen only when you are needed, and vanish the rest of the time. She pulled her black vest down, smoothing out a wrinkle that wasn't really there, and tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. She felt small in this room. The ceiling was so high it seemed to go on forever, with a giant crystal chandelier hanging down like a cloud made of ice. The walls were lined with paintings that looked old and important, and the furniture looked like the kind of thing you weren't supposed to sit on. The room was buzzing with low, polite chatter. Men in expensive suits stood with women in beautiful dresses, holding glasses of wine and talking about things that didn't matter to Lily: stock markets, vacations in Europe, and new cars. She moved through them like a ghost, offering a gentle nod and a soft cider to anyone who made eye contact. Most people just took a glass without looking at her, as if the tray had floated by itself. But Lily wasn't really listening to the conversations, and she wasn't looking at the people. Her eyes kept drifting to the far corner of the room. It was a spot that was slightly quieter than the rest, bathed in a soft, warm light from a floor lamp. There, sitting all by itself on a small raised platform, was a piano. It wasn't just any piano. It was a grand piano, black and shiny, looking like a giant, sleek beast sleeping in the corner. The lid was propped open, revealing the strings inside, and the white keys seemed to glow in the warm light. It was the most beautiful thing Lily had ever seen. A man in a tuxedo was sitting on the bench, playing soft background music. He was good, his fingers moving quickly and precisely, but he looked bored. His face was blank, as if he was thinking about what he was going to have for dinner later. He played the notes perfectly, but there was no feeling in it. It was just noise to fill the silence between the guests' conversations. Lily couldn't take her eyes off the instrument. She tightened her grip on the tray. To everyone else in the room, that piano was just another expensive piece of furniture, another sign of the host's wealth. It was worth more than Lily's family made in 5 years. It probably cost more than the apartment building where she lived with her mother. But to Lily, it wasn't a price tag. It was a dream. She remembered the old keyboard in her living room at home. It was a plastic electric keyboard her dad had found at a garage sale for $10. Half the keys didn't work right, and you had to hit them hard to make a sound. It buzzed when you turned up the volume, and it smelled like dust. But it was hers. She had spent hours sitting on the floor of her small bedroom, teaching herself chords by watching videos on the library computer. She played until her fingers were sore, until the buzzing sound became the soundtrack of her life. Her dad had been the one who encouraged her. He didn't know how to play a note, but he loved to hear her try. He used to say, "Lily, you have music in your fingers. One day, you're going to play for the world." He had passed away 2 years ago, and now, playing was the only way she felt close to him. It was the only way she let the sadness out without crying. Looking at the grand piano in the corner, Lily felt a deep ache in her chest. She knew exactly what it would feel like to touch those keys. She knew the weight of the action, the resistance of the ivory, the way the sound would vibrate through the bench and into her bones. She could imagine sitting there, closing her eyes, and letting the music take over the whole room. "Excuse me, miss." The voice pulled Lily back to reality. A tall woman in a blue dress was standing in front of her, looking annoyed. Lily realized she had stopped moving and was staring blankly at the piano. She quickly stepped forward. "Oh, I am so sorry, ma'am," Lily said, her voice soft. "Apple cider." The woman took a glass and turned away immediately, not even waiting for a response. Lily felt her face get hot. She forced herself to start moving again, walking slowly along the edge of the crowd. She reminded herself why she was here. She needed the money. College wasn't going to pay for itself, and her mother was working double shifts just to keep the lights on. Lily had promised herself she wouldn't mess this up. She moved through the room, offering drinks, smiling politely when people looked at her, and trying to ignore the piano. But it was hard. Every time the piano player changed the melody, her head snapped toward the sound. Why is he playing like that, she thought. He's playing it so safely. He's not taking any risks. That piano can sing, but he's just making it whisper. She watched a man walk past the piano without even glancing at it. It bothered her. It bothered her that such a magnificent instrument was just being treated as background noise. It was like having a racehorse and using it to pull a plow. Lily adjusted the tray on her hand. It was getting heavy. Her wrists started to throb a little bit. She walked toward the back of the room, near the curtains, hoping to stay out of the way for a moment. She leaned against the wall, just for a second, to let her arm rest. From this angle, she could see the entire room. She saw the groups of people laughing, the servers in white jackets moving like clockwork, and the host of the party, Julian Thorne, standing near the fireplace. He was a serious-looking man with gray hair and a suit that looked like it cost more than her car. He was talking to a younger man, gesturing with his hands. He looked powerful, important, and completely untouchable. Lily looked back at the piano. The pianist had stopped playing to turn a page in his sheet music. The silence in the corner of the room felt heavy. The empty bench waited. A crazy thought popped into Lily's head. It was a thought that made her heart beat a little faster and her palms sweat. It was the kind of thought that was dangerous, the kind that could get her fired in a second. What if I just walked over there? She pushed the thought away immediately. Don't be stupid, she told herself. You are here to serve drinks. You are wearing a $10 vest and shoes with holes in the soles. You don't belong on that stage. But the feeling didn't go away. It gnawed at her. She looked at the Steinway again. The black surface was so shiny it reflected the candles on the tables. It looked like it was calling her name. She thought about her father. He used to tell her that opportunities were rare things. When you see a door, Lily, he used to say, you don't stand there looking at the wood. You knock. Or better yet, you walk right through it. Lily looked around the huge room. All these people had money. They had connections. They had opportunities handed to them every day. She didn't. She had to work harder than anyone just to get a foot in the door. But tonight, the door was open. The piano was sitting right there. The pianist was on a break. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cool, scented air. Her hands were trembling on the silver tray. She looked at the heavy exit at the back of the room, the way back to the safety of the kitchen. She could go back there, wash the glasses, and go home with her $50. Or she could do something crazy. She looked at the host, Mr. Thorne. He was laughing now, a loud, confident laugh. He didn't notice the catering girl standing in the shadows. Lily made her decision. She didn't think about the consequences. She didn't think about being humiliated or thrown out. She just thought about the music. She thought about the song she played every night on her broken keyboard at home, the song that made her feel like her dad was sitting next to her. She carefully walked over to a small side table against the wall. She set the heavy silver tray down. The clink of the glasses touching the wood sounded like a gunshot in her own mind, but nobody else heard it. She wiped her sweaty palms on her black pants. She smoothed her hair again. She took a step away from the wall. Then another. She wasn't carrying a tray anymore. Her hands were empty. She felt light, but also terrified. She walked past a group of women holding wine glasses. She walked past a tall man checking his watch. She walked directly toward the center of the room, toward the quiet corner where the shiny black beast waited. The piano player was just coming back from his break, buttoning his jacket. Lily walked right up to the small set of stairs that led up to the platform. She could hear the low murmur of the crowd fading into the background, replaced by the loud thumping of her own heart in her ears. She knew people were staring. She knew it was strange for a server to leave her station. But she didn't stop. She kept walking until she was standing at the edge of the stage, looking up at the most beautiful piano in the world. The room was filled with the sound of low chatter and the soft clinking of glasses, but to Lily, it sounded like a roaring ocean. She had stepped away from the safety of the walls, leaving her tray of drinks behind, and now she was standing near the front of the room. The air up here felt thinner, or maybe she just wasn't breathing enough. Every step she took toward the piano platform felt heavier than the last, as if invisible weights were tied to her ankles. The pianist, a man with a neat mustache and a very formal tuxedo, had just returned from his break. He was buttoning his jacket, getting ready to sit back down and play another hour of quiet, uninteresting music. When he saw Lily standing there, he stopped. He looked at her black vest, her cheap shoes, and her nervous face. His expression wasn't angry, just confused. He glanced around, looking for a manager or a head waiter, wondering why a server was blocking his way. Lily's heart was beating so hard she could feel it pulsing in her throat. She knew this was it. There was no turning back now. Everyone was watching. Or at least, it felt like everyone was watching. She could feel the eyes of the guests turning toward her like spotlights. The laughter in the room died down a little, replaced by a murmur of curiosity. A server standing near the piano was not part of the schedule. She looked out across the sea of people. In the center of it all stood Julian Thorne, the owner of the house. He was holding a glass of dark red wine, talking to a group of men in expensive suits. He looked powerful and confident, completely in his element. He hadn't noticed her yet. Lily swallowed hard. She had to speak, but her voice felt trapped in her chest. She took a shaky breath and forced the words out. They came out quieter than she wanted, trembling slightly. "Excuse me," she said to the pianist. The pianist raised an eyebrow, looking down at her from the platform. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was polite but dismissive, the kind of voice you use when you think someone has made a mistake. I would like to play," Lily said. Her voice was shaking, but she didn't look down at the floor. She kept her eyes on the piano keys, which were glowing in the soft light. Just one song. Please. The pianist chuckled softly, a dry, humorless sound. I don't think so, miss. This is a private event. I am the hired musician. He gestured vaguely behind her, toward the kitchen doors. If you are looking for water or the restrooms, they are that way. He moved to step past her and sit on the bench, assuming the conversation was over. Wait, Lily said. The word came out louder this time, sharper. She didn't mean to be rude, but she couldn't let him sit down. If he sat down, the moment would be gone. She turned her head away from the piano and looked directly at the man who owned the house. Mr. Thorne, she called out. Her voice cut through the low buzz of the room. It wasn't a shout, but it was clear. It carried that strange, trembling strength that comes from pure desperation. The group of men talking to Julian Thorne stopped speaking. The host of the party turned slowly. He looked over the heads of the crowd, searching for the person who had spoken to him. When his eyes landed on Lily, standing by the piano in her catering uniform, he frowned. He didn't recognize her. He looked at the pianist, then back at the girl. The entire room went quiet. The silence spread out from the center like a ripple. People stopped eating their fancy appetizers. They stopped sipping their expensive drinks. They all turned to look at the young woman who had dared to interrupt the host. It was a breach of etiquette, a serious mistake. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Lily felt her face burning hot. She knew she looked foolish. She knew she looked like a girl who didn't know her place. But she also knew that if she walked away now, she would regret it for the rest of her life. Julian Thorne didn't call for security. He didn't yell at her to get out. He just stared at her with a calm, unreadable expression. He took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving her face. He was measuring her, trying to figure out if she was a threat or just a fool. The silence stretched on for seconds that felt like hours. The pianist stood awkwardly by the bench, not knowing whether to sit or stand. The guests whispered to each other, wondering what was happening. Finally, Julian spoke. His voice was deep and smooth, commanding the room easily. Mr. Thorne, he repeated, correcting her gently. What is it? Lily felt her knees shaking, but she locked them together. She took a small step closer to the edge of the platform. She didn't bow or curtsy. She just stood there, looking at him with honest, open eyes. I know I am just a server, she said, her voice gaining a little strength. I know I am not supposed to be up here. But that piano, it is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. And I play. I play every day. She gestured toward the instrument, her hand trembling. I know a song, she continued. It fits this room. It fits tonight. And if I walk out of here without playing it, I think my heart might break. I am not asking for money. I don't want anything. I just want to play one song. Please. A few guests laughed quietly. It was a nervous laugh, the kind people make when they feel awkward. They expected Julian to laugh too, or to wave his hand and have her escorted out. It was ridiculous, after all. A catering girl demanding to play a concert grand piano at a millionaire's party. It was the plot of a silly movie, not real life. But Julian didn't laugh. He looked at Lily's hands. They were rough and red, the hands of a person who worked hard for a living. Then he looked at her face. He saw the fear there, but he also saw something else. He saw a fire. He saw a kind of wild, desperate hope that he hadn't seen in a long time. He remembered what it felt like to want something so badly it hurt. He remembered being young and having nothing but a dream and the guts to fight for it. He set his wine glass down on the table next to him with a soft clink. "Mr. Thorne," the pianist interrupted, looking annoyed. "Sir, I really must get back to the set. The guests are waiting for the music." Julian held up a hand to silence the man. He didn't even look at the pianist. He kept his eyes locked on Lily. "What is your name?" he asked her. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Vance." "Lily," Julian said. He rolled the name around in his mouth, testing it. He looked at the piano, then back at her. The room was dead silent now, waiting for his judgment. The tension was incredible. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. "Do you know how to play this instrument?" Julian asked. "It is not a toy. It is a very delicate, very expensive machine." "I know," Lily said quickly. "I promise I will treat it with respect. I won't bang on it. I just need to play." Julian looked at her for another long moment. The guests were shifting in their seats, uncomfortable with the delay. But Julian seemed to be in another world. He was thinking about risks. He was thinking about the boring, safe life he lived now, filled with people who always said yes and never took chances. He looked at this girl, dressed in a cheap vest, shaking with fear but refusing to back down. She was taking the biggest risk of her life just to touch a piano. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was a faint smile, barely there, but it softened his hard face. "Very well," he said. The room gasped softly. The pianist's jaw dropped. "Sir," the pianist stammered. "You heard me," Julian said, his voice firm but calm. He gestured toward the bench. "Step aside, please. Let the lady play." The pianist looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better than to contradict the man who paid him. He stepped away from the bench, looking sulky and embarrassed. He shot a dirty look at Lily as he passed her, but she didn't even notice. Her eyes were fixed on the keys. Lily felt like she was walking in a dream. She slowly climbed the 2 steps up to the platform. The carpet on the stage was soft and thick under her worn-out shoes. She walked over to the bench. It was made of leather, smooth and cool. She sat down slowly, scared that if she moved too fast, she would wake up and find herself back in the kitchen washing dishes. She looked at the keys. They were white and black, pristine and perfect. Up close, the piano looked even bigger, more intimidating. But as she placed her fingers on the keys, a strange calmness washed over her. The trembling in her hands stopped. The noise of the room faded away. It was just her and the music now. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She didn't look at the wealthy guests staring at her. She didn't look at Julian Thorne watching from across the room. She thought about her father. She thought about the song she used to play on the broken keyboard in the living room. She pictured him sitting in his old armchair, smiling at her. She pressed down on the first chord. The sound that came out was rich and full, vibrating through the floor and into her body. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever made. And then, she began to play. The sound that came from the piano wasn't just music, it was a story. It started low and soft, a gentle melody that seemed to float in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. It was a simple tune, the kind that feels familiar even if you have never heard it before. The guests, who had been whispering and giggling just moments ago, slowly went quiet. The silence didn't happen because someone told them to be quiet. It happened because they couldn't help themselves. The sound was too beautiful to ignore. Lily's eyes were closed. She wasn't thinking about where she was. She wasn't thinking about the expensive dresses or the crystal glasses or the people who could buy and sell her life 100 times over. In her mind, she was back in her small living room. She was sitting on the carpet, the dusty smell of the old electric keyboard in her nose. She could see her father sitting in his favorite armchair, his eyes closed, a small smile on his face as he listened to her practice. She played the notes her father had loved the most. It was a lullaby he used to hum to her when she was a little girl and scared of the dark. Back then, on the broken keyboard, the song sounded thin and tinny. The C key stuck sometimes, and the speaker buzzed like an angry fly. But here, on this magnificent instrument, the song came alive. The piano seemed to sing. The notes were deep and warm, vibrating through the floorboards and up into the bench. Lily's fingers moved across the ivory keys, finding the places they knew by heart. She didn't have to look. She didn't have to think. Her hands just knew where to go. It felt like the music was coming from somewhere deep inside her, pouring out through her fingers and into the instrument. As the melody grew, the room completely changed. The atmosphere shifted from stiff and formal to something warm and raw. The guests stopped looking at their phones. They stopped checking the time. They turned toward the stage, their drinks forgotten in their hands. Julian Thorne stood perfectly still near the fireplace. He had heard thousands of songs in his life. He had hired the best orchestras in the world to play at his parties. He knew technical perfection. He knew complicated, fast-paced classical pieces that showed off how fast a musician could move their hands. But this was different. This wasn't about speed or difficulty. This was about feeling. He watched the young girl sitting at the piano. Her posture wasn't perfect like the pianist who had played before. She leaned forward slightly, her body swaying with the music. She looked small against the giant black curve of the instrument, but her presence filled the room. She played with a gentle touch, then suddenly hit a chord with force that made the strings hum. It was like she was having a conversation with the piano, and they were understanding each other perfectly. The melody swelled, becoming louder and more intense. It sounded like a wave crashing against a cliff, then pulling back to whisper against the sand. It was the sound of sadness, but also the sound of hope. It was the sound of missing someone you love, but knowing they are still with you. It was so human, so real, that it made some of the guests feel a strange tightness in their chests. One older woman in the front row reached up and dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. She didn't know why she was crying. The song wasn't sad in a depressing way, but it touched something deep inside her that she hadn't felt in years. It reminded her of her own childhood, of times that were gone and could never come back. The music had that power. It cut through the expensive clothes and the polite social masks and went straight to the heart. Lily poured everything she had into the song. She played the exhaustion she felt from working long hours. She played the loneliness she felt when she walked home alone at night. She played the love she still held for her father, even though he had been gone for 2 years. It was a risk, showing so much of herself to strangers. It was like opening her chest and letting them see her heart beating. But she didn't care anymore. She was lost in the flow of the music. The acoustics in the room were perfect. The high notes rang out clear and bell-like, floating up to the high ceiling and mixing with the light of the chandelier. The low notes rumbled like distant thunder, grounding the song in something deep and solid. Every corner of the vast hall was filled with the sound. There was a moment in the song where the music slowed down. It became very quiet, almost like a secret. Lily's hands hovered over the keys for a split second before pressing down gently. The notes were soft and fragile, hanging in the air like bubbles. The guests held their breath, afraid that even the sound of their breathing might pop the bubble. It was the most intense silence the room had ever known. Julian Thorne looked around at his guests. These were people who were usually hard to impress. They were used to luxury and entertainment. But right now, they looked like children listening to a bedtime story. Their faces were soft. Their guard was down. They weren't judging the girl for her cheap uniform or her scuffed shoes. They were just listening. He realized then that this wasn't just a performance. It was a gift. Lily wasn't playing to show off. She was playing to give something of herself. She was sharing a piece of her soul, and in doing so, she was connecting with everyone in the room. It was a rare and precious thing. Lily could feel the energy of the room, even with her eyes closed. She could feel the stillness. It gave her courage. She put a little more strength into the final chorus of the song. The melody rose up, soaring high and strong, full of emotion. It was a sound of triumph, of survival. It said, "I am here, I have struggled, but I am still standing." The vibrations of the piano hummed against her fingertips. The wood of the instrument seemed alive, responding to her touch. She felt a rush of joy that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was the pure, simple joy of doing the one thing she was meant to do. In this moment, she wasn't a poor girl from the wrong side of town. She wasn't a server. She was a musician. As the song neared its end, the tempo began to slow down. The notes became softer, drifting away like smoke. Lily played the final chords with care. She didn't rush them. She let them fade out naturally, letting the sound linger in the air until it was barely a whisper. She pressed the last key and held it, feeling the vibration die away into silence. She lifted her hands off the keys and placed them gently in her lap. The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't an awkward silence this time. It was a respectful silence. A holy silence. It was the kind of quiet that falls over a place when something truly important has just happened. No one spoke for a long time. The guests just stared at the stage. Some of them had tears running down their faces. Others were just smiling, looking lost in thought. It felt as if the room had been holding its breath for the entire song, and now they were finally letting it out. Lily slowly opened her eyes. The bright lights of the room made her blink. The spell broke. The reality of where she was came rushing back in. She saw the expensive furniture. She saw the grand chandelier. She saw the hundreds of eyes staring at her. Panic flared up in her chest instantly. What had she just done? She had interrupted a party. She had taken over the stage. She had played a song that wasn't on the schedule. Her hands started to shake again. The calmness she felt while playing vanished. She stood up quickly, almost knocking the bench over. She could feel her face turning bright red. She felt exposed and vulnerable. She had poured her heart out, and now she felt naked in front of all these rich people. I'm sorry, she stammered into the microphone, her voice small and trembling again. She didn't wait for a reaction. She didn't wait for applause. She just knew she had to get away. She turned and hurried off the stage, her shoes squeaking softly on the floor. She felt like running, but she forced herself to walk fast, keeping her head down. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to be invisible again. She just wanted to go home and hide under her covers. But the silence of the room followed her. It was a heavy blanket of awe that refused to let her go completely unnoticed. Even as she fled toward the back of the room, she could feel the gaze of the crowd burning into her back. They weren't looking at her with judgment anymore. They were looking at her with wonder. And as she disappeared behind a large curtain into the service hallway, the room seemed to wake up from a dream, the sound of the music still echoing in their ears. Lily's heart was pounding so hard it hurt. She didn't stop walking until she passed through the heavy velvet curtains and reached the service hallway. The air here was different, cooler, smelling of cleaning supplies and yeast from the kitchen. It was the smell of work, the smell of reality. Her safe haven. She leaned against the wall for a second, pressing her hand over her chest to try and calm the frantic rhythm. Stupid, she whispered to herself. So stupid. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill over. She had broken every rule in the book. She had humiliated herself in front of the most important people in the city. She had touched a piano she had no business touching, and then she had run away like a frightened child. She took a deep breath and wiped her palms on her pants. She needed to get her tray. She needed to finish her shift. If she was lucky, nobody would say anything to her. If she was lucky, the head chef wouldn't fire her on the spot before the night was over. She just needed to keep her head down and disappear into the background again. She walked quickly toward the side table where she had left her silver tray. It was still there, the glasses of cider sitting untouched, condensation dripping down the sides and pooling on the polished wood. She reached out to grab it, but before her fingers touched the silver handle, a deep voice spoke behind her. "That was your father's song." Lily froze. She knew that voice. It was the voice from the microphone, the voice that had given her permission to play. She turned around slowly. Julian Thorne was standing only a few feet away. He was taller than he looked from across the room, and up close, he seemed to fill the space. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. His face was serious, his eyes sharp and intelligent as they studied her. He didn't look angry. He just looked curious. Lily felt her throat go dry. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Yes, sir," she managed to whisper. "How did you know?" "I recognized it," Julian said. He took a small step closer, his hands clasped behind his back. "It's an old melody. Very old. Not many people play it anymore. It's called The River's Bend. My grandfather used to hum it to me when I was a boy, in the days before we had any money. It means you miss someone very much." Lily nodded, a single tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. "My dad taught it to me. On a cheap keyboard we had. He said it was the only song that mattered." "He was right," Julian said softly. "It is the only song that matters, if you play it like that." Lily looked down at her shoes. She felt so small and scruffy standing next to him. She expected him to lecture her now. She expected him to tell her that while the music was nice, she couldn't just hijack a private party. She expected him to ask for her name tag so he could report her to the catering agency. "I am sorry for interrupting, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I shouldn't have done that. I will go back to the kitchen now. I won't cause any more trouble." She reached for the tray again, desperate to have something to hold, something to shield herself with. "You are not going back to the kitchen," Julian said. Lily stopped. She looked up at him, confused. "Sir." Julian looked at her hands. They were red and rough, the hands of a girl who spent hours washing dishes and scrubbing floors. Then he looked at her face. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the fear, and the burning ambition that had driven her to the stage. "Who taught you to play?" he asked. "My dad, mostly," Lily said. "And then I watched videos on the computer at the library. I practiced on the keyboard whenever I had free time. He passed away 2 years ago. It's just me and my mom now." "And you want to play music?" Julian asked. It wasn't a casual question. He sounded like a businessman making a serious inquiry. "It's all I want," Lily said. The words came out before she could stop them. "It's the only time I feel like me. But I know I can't. I have to work. We need the money." Julian was silent for a moment. He looked past her, toward the main hall where the guests were still talking in low, excited whispers about the performance. Then he looked back at her. "I didn't build this company by ignoring talent when it walks through the front door," he said. His voice was low and firm. "I built it by finding diamonds in the rough. Do you know what that means?" Lily shook her head slowly. "It means that sometimes, the most valuable things are covered in dirt," Julian said. "You shouldn't be carrying that tray, Lily. Your hands were made for the piano, not for serving drinks." The kindness in his voice broke down the wall Lily had built around herself. Her lip quivered. "But I don't have a piano, sir. And I don't have money for lessons. I can't even afford to fix the keyboard I have." Julian nodded, as if he was checking off a list in his head. "I know. I can see that. But talent like yours is a terrible thing to waste. If you spend the next 10 years serving drinks because you are too poor to pay for music school, the world loses something. And I don't like losing things." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Lily tensed up, thinking he was pulling out a wallet to give her a tip. $100 would pay the electric bill. 200 would buy groceries. But he didn't take out money. Instead, he pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and a silver pen. He scribbled something on a page, tore it out neatly, and folded it. "Take this," he said, holding the paper out to her. Lily hesitated. She looked at the paper, then at him. "What is this?" "An opportunity," Julian said simply. "I am not a charity, Lily. I don't give away money for free. But I invest in things that I believe in. And I believe in you." Lily reached out with a shaking hand and took the folded paper. It felt heavy in her hand, like it carried the weight of her entire future. "There is a conservatory downtown," Julian said. "The best in the city. I serve on the board there. They owe me a favor. I want you to go there on Monday morning. Ask for the director of admissions. Give her that note." Lily stared at him. "You want me to apply to music school?" "I want you to audit a class," Julian corrected her. "Just one class to start. If the teachers there see what I just saw, they won't be able to say no. And if you need an instrument, well, we can discuss that later. But you cannot play on broken keyboards anymore. It is an insult to the music." Lily felt dizzy. This couldn't be happening. It felt like one of those dreams where you are flying, and then you wake up and hit the floor. "But, the scholarship. I don't have the grades. And the tuition." "We will worry about the money," Julian said, cutting her off gently but firmly. "That is my problem, not yours. Your only job right now is to say yes." "Yes," Lily whispered immediately. The word flew out of her mouth. "Yes. Of course." Julian finally smiled. It was a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He looked different now, not like a scary billionaire, but like a human being who was happy to help. Good. Now, I suspect you have a tray to finish. Lily looked at the silver tray on the table. It seemed strange to go back to passing out drinks after this conversation, but she knew she had to. Yes, sir. Finish your shift, Julian said. Do your job well, that is the first lesson. Respect the work, even if it isn't your dream. Discipline is what makes a musician, not just feelings. He stepped back, adjusting his cuff. I will be in touch, Lily. Don't lose that note. He turned and walked back toward the party, his stride confident and purposeful. He didn't look back. Lily stood alone in the hallway for a long time. She looked down at the folded piece of paper in her hand. She didn't open it. She was almost afraid to. But holding it made her feel warm inside. The fear and the shame she had felt only minutes ago were gone, replaced by a tiny, glowing spark of hope. She picked up the silver tray. It felt lighter than before. Her hands didn't shake. She straightened her vest, took a deep breath, and walked back out through the curtains. The guests were still talking, the music had started again, the boring pianist was back, but Lily didn't feel invisible anymore. As she moved through the crowd offering cider, she walked with her head high. She wasn't just a server anymore. She was a musician in the making, carrying a secret future in her pocket. 2 days had passed since the party, but Lily felt like she was living in a different world. She walked down the busy sidewalk of the city center, clutching her bag strap so tightly her knuckles were white. The city noise, cars honking, people shouting, sirens wailing usually overwhelmed her, but today she didn't hear any of it. Her focus was entirely on the large brick building in front of her. The City Conservatory of Music. It was an imposing building with tall stone pillars and wide steps leading up to heavy glass entrances. Students were everywhere. They carried instrument cases on their backs, guitars, violins, cellos. They walked with a confident stride, wearing scarves and talking animatedly about composers and techniques. They looked like they belonged here. Lily looked down at her own clothes. She was wearing her best dress, a simple dark blue one she had bought for a church service 3 years ago, and her black flats. She felt painfully out of place. She took a deep breath and climbed the stairs. Every step felt heavy. Doubt was gnawing at her stomach. What if this was a mistake? What if the note in her bag wasn't real? What if Mr. Thorne had forgotten about her, or worse, what if this was just a cruel joke? She pushed through the glass doors into the lobby. The air inside was quiet and smelled of old wood and floor wax. The ceiling was high, and the sounds of distant music floated through the hallways, a trumpet practicing scales, a piano running through a fast exercise. To Lily, it was the most beautiful noise in the world. She walked up to the reception desk. A woman with glasses and a tight bun was typing on a computer. She didn't look up. "Excuse me," Lily said. Her voice sounded small in the large echoey room. The woman kept typing. "Name, please." "Lily. Lily Vance. I have an appointment." Or, "Well, I have a note for the director of admissions." The receptionist stopped typing and looked over her glasses. She eyed Lily up and down, taking in the simple dress and the nervous posture. "A note, let me see it." Lily opened her bag and took out the folded piece of paper Mr. Thorne had given her. She had handled it so carefully that it didn't even have a crease in it. She handed it across the desk. The woman unfolded it. She read the few lines written on the paper. Her eyes went wide, and her back instantly straightened. She looked at Lily again, but this time, her expression was completely different. There was respect now, maybe even a little shock. "Of course," the woman said, her voice much softer. "Miss Vance. Please, take a seat. I will let the director know you are here." Lily sat on a hard wooden bench against the wall. She waited for 20 minutes. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped. Finally, a woman in a gray suit came out. She was the director of admissions. "Miss Vance?" the woman asked. Lily stood up. "Yes. Please, come with me. Mr. Thorne called personally this morning. We are very eager to hear you play." Lily followed her down a long hallway. They passed practice rooms with small windows. Inside, she saw students sitting at pianos, focusing intently. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hall. The director opened it and ushered Lily inside. It was a recital hall. It wasn't huge, but it was grand. There were rows of velvet seats, and at the front, all alone on a stage, sat a black grand piano. It wasn't the Steinway from the party, but it was beautiful. It looked shiny and perfect. "Please," the director said, gesturing to the stage. "Whenever you are ready." Lily walked up the steps. Her legs felt like jelly. She sat on the bench. It was firm and comfortable. She looked out at the empty seats, except for the director sitting in the front row with a notepad. Lily closed her eyes. She blocked out the fear. She blocked out the thought that she didn't belong here. She thought about the note in her pocket. She thought about Mr. Thorne believing in her. And mostly, she thought about her father. She imagined him sitting in the front row, smiling, waiting for her to start. She placed her hands on the keys. She didn't play a simple scale to warm up. She didn't ask for permission. She just started to play. She played the River's Bend. But this time, it sounded different. It sounded fuller. The action of the keys was perfect, responding to every slight movement of her fingers. She poured everything she had into the music, the struggle of the past few years, the hard work, the fear, and the overwhelming gratitude. She played the song not just for herself, but for every person who had ever told her no. She played for her mother, working hard at home. She played for the chance she had been given. When she finished the last note, she let it hang in the air. She opened her eyes and looked at the director. The woman wasn't writing on her notepad. She was just sitting there, her pen resting in her hand. She looked stunned. There was a silence in the room, and then the director stood up and began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate clap. "Miss Vance," the director said, walking up to the edge of the stage. "Your technique is raw. You have never had a proper lesson in your life, have you?" Lily shook her head. "No, ma'am." "But your touch is a gift," the director said. "We don't turn away gifts like this. Mr. Thorne has arranged for a full scholarship. It covers your tuition, your books, and a stipend for living expenses. But he also left one more instruction." Lily leaned forward. "What is it?" "He requested that we give you access to the hall after hours," the director said, unlocking a drawer in her desk and pulling out a small envelope. "He said you practice too much, and that the dorms are too loud. He wants you to have a quiet place to play." She handed the envelope to Lily. Inside was a set of keys. They were heavy and brass. "These are the keys to the old practice hall," the director explained. "It is a separate building behind the main campus. It is usually reserved for faculty. You can go there anytime, day or night. It has a concert piano. It is yours to use. Lily stared at the keys in her hand. They glinted under the stage lights. She didn't know what to say. She felt a lump in her throat so big she couldn't swallow. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust. It was about someone believing she was worth the best. "Thank you," Lily whispered, but the words weren't enough. "Thank you so much." Years passed. The life of a music student was not easy. It was filled with early mornings and late nights. Her fingers were often sore, and her brain was tired from learning theory and history. But Lily loved every second of it. She practiced in the old practice hall for hours every night, the only sound the music and the rain tapping against the high windows. She learned to read complex scores. She learned to play Chopin, Mozart, and Beethoven. But she never forgot the river's bend. She played it at the end of every practice session, like a promise kept. Then, the big day arrived. Lily stood backstage at the Grand Concert Hall in the city. This was the biggest venue in town. It held 2,000 people. Outside, the marquee lights were lit up. Cars were pulling up to the curb, dropping off wealthy patrons in gowns and tuxedos. It was her graduation recital. But it was more than that. It was her professional debut. She peeked through the heavy curtains. The seats were filling up. She saw professors, her friends from school, and her mother, sitting in the front row with a tissue already in her hand. And there, in the center of the third row, sat Julian Thorne. He looked older than the last time she saw him, but he looked the same, too calm, powerful, and attentive. He was looking at the stage, waiting. The house lights dimmed. The chatter in the audience died down. The announcer walked out to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said, "please welcome a remarkable young talent, making her debut performance. Ms. Lily Vance." Lily took a deep breath. She smoothed the skirt of her long, white dress. She walked out onto the stage. The light was blinding, so she couldn't see the audience very well, but she could feel them. She could feel the wall of energy coming from 2,000 people. She sat at the massive concert grand piano. It was the biggest piano she had ever played. She reached out and touched the keys. They were cool and ready. She didn't start with a flashy, fast piece to show off. She started slow. She played the river's bend. As the first notes floated out over the audience, the silence was absolute. It was the same silence from the party all those years ago, but multiplied by 1,000. She played with a maturity and grace that surprised everyone. She wasn't just playing notes, she was telling the story of her journey. She played about the girl who was scared to ask for a chance. She played about the man who gave it to her. She played about the power of dreams. In the third row, Julian Thorne closed his eyes and listened. He smiled. He remembered the nervous girl in the cheap vest. He heard the raw talent he had bet on, now polished into something brilliant. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He hadn't just bought a building or a company. He had helped a soul fly. When Lily played the final chord, she held it. The sound seemed to suspend time in the hall. She lifted her hands and the room exploded. The applause wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar. 2,000 people standing up, cheering, whistling, and shouting. Lily stood up and curtsied. She looked out into the darkness, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. She looked right where she knew Mr. Thorne was sitting and nodded. She couldn't see him clearly in the lights, but she knew he was there. She knew that because of one moment of bravery, and one act of kindness, her life had changed forever. She walked off the stage, the sound of the applause washing over her like a warm wave. She had walked in with nothing but a dream and a borrowed piano. She walked out as a musician. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that her father was proud.